Hey guys, tonight we wash up on a jagged shoreline where the wind doesn't just whistle, it murmurs. Murmurs, warnings, songs, and maybe invitations. The sea foam fizzles at your ankles as moonlight carves silver across black waves. Something's out there. Not a ship, not a whale, a voice, sweet, haunting. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where and when you all drift off. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, each step sinking into damp sand. The horizon yawns wide. It's always wider near the sea, like the world's opening its jaw to swallow you whole. The stars above are pinholes in a navy blanket. No GPS, no compass, just the eternal stretch of water echoing with the sound of something. Behind you, the cliffs loom high and craggy, the sort of landscape that's hosted sacrifices, shipwrecks, and interpretive dance festivals, if you believe some Victorian travelogues. But tonight, it's just you and the rising suspicion that the rocks are humming. The earliest mariners believed these shores were alive, not metaphorically, literally alive with creatures that sang from the crevices, luring men toward jagged death. And we're not talking about play-listed sirens lounging on rocks. In their earliest form, they were bird-bodied, woman-headed, and honestly terrifying. Picture a chicken of the sea, but with less seasoning and more psychological warfare. You sit on a half-buried log that's probably older than colonialism. The sea whispers again. Not words this time, just syllables. Some of them feel familiar, like a childhood tune, or your neighbor's ringtone. Are you imagining it? Possibly. But ancient Greeks sure didn't think so. According to myth, the sirens nested along this coast, calling to passing ships with songs so beautiful, sailors either jumped overboard or steered into cliffs just to get closer. Historians still argue whether the original sirens were a warning about female temptation, natural dangers, or just a poetic way to explain why Greg crashed the trireme again. But in any case, these sirens weren't romantic. They were lethal. No cuddling, no Disney eyes, just a feathered banshee inviting you to die melodically. Still, there's something oddly comforting in the thought. Not the dying part, obviously, but the idea that the ocean has a voice. That when you're far from shore, someone or something might be singing just for you. Ancient mariners described it as a high, tremulous call, like a flute played underwater. Others compared it to a mother's lullaby, which says more about their childhood than they probably realized. You shuffle closer to the edge. There's seaweed wrapped around a chunk of driftwood. It's shaped almost like a harp. Coincidence maybe. Or maybe this is the siren's instrument of choice left behind after some ill-fated duet. You pick it up just in case. One Roman writer claimed that the sirens perched near the Strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily. Not the worst real estate, great view, good fish, constant traffic. He warned that sailors who heard their song would forget everything, their homes, their purpose, even their names. And when you think about how often you've walked into a room and forgotten why maybe you've already heard one, a fringe theory because every bedtime needs at least one suggests that sirens were actually misunderstood weather warnings, that their songs were the echoes of sudden storm fronts distorted over cliffs and heard by superstitious ears. Personally, I'm not sure Doppler radar hums a tune that would tempt a sailor to jump ship, but hey, science has its off days. The air grows cooler now, the tide's crawling in like a lazy cat. You wrap your arms around yourself. Somewhere out there, a wave crashes with a note so crisp it almost forms a word. Stay, it says, or maybe stray. Hard to tell with waves they don't enunciate. Nearby, a gull screeches. Not quite the siren's pitch, but close enough to jolt you upright. You're not scared exactly, just aware. Aware that this place has listened longer than you've been alive. That long before you arrived with your tired eyes and bedtime playlist, others came here. Some didn't leave, or if they did, they left part of themselves behind. You lie back on the sand, now eyes half closed, listening. The sea doesn't just lap, it loops, like ambient noise with menace. And just before sleep tugs you downward, a final thought flickers. Maybe the siren's embrace isn't forbidden because it's dangerous, but because it's too peaceful. And you weren't supposed to want that. You wake up, or at least you think you do, somewhere inside a library that smells like salt and mildew. The shelves creak like ship timbers, and the scrolls are sticky with something that's definitely not ink. One unrolls itself with a sigh, revealing a bird-headed woman in profile, her wings stretched like she's mid-area. You blink again. Nope, still here. You shuffle down an aisle labeled Pre-Classical Mythology Humanoid Threats. The air here tastes dusty and smug. Ancient Greek scholars, scribbling furiously with ink-stained fingers, tried to pin down what a siren actually was, and, spoiler alert, they couldn't agree. In Homer's Odyssey, sirens live on a meadow filled with bones. Charming. They don't fly or swim, they just sit and sing. But in earlier Greek art, sirens were clearly avian, sharp-taloned, feathery things with the heads of women and eyes that said, "I eat sailors for brunch." Historians still argue whether this bird lady version predates the more familiar mermaid look, or whether both forms coexisted like rival girl bands. One camp insists the fish-tailed beauty came much later, probably imported from Near Eastern mythology, or adapted by medieval Christian artists with an agenda. The agenda probably make lust, Njar's doom, and fear attractive women who live near water. Very subtle. You tilt your head. That's not a wave. That's a note. Somewhere far outside the scroll stacks, you hear a sustained tone. It vibrates against your sternum like bass through a car door. You try to follow it, passing murals, mosaics, even an old amphora where two sirens are high-fiving over a drowning man. Classy. You pause at a statue carved from veined marble. One wing curls protectively around her body. The face, though damaged by time, still smiles faintly. You trace the inscription with your fingers. It's barely readable, but hints at the name Parthenope, one of the original three sirens. She, along with her sisters Ligeia and Leucosia, supposedly flung themselves into the sea when Odysseus resisted their song. The irony, their punishment was death by heartbreak. Greek mythology really doesn't hold back. You sing, they die. You don't sing, they die. You reject their song politely, and they still die. A side scroll mentions an alternate origin. Some said the sirens were once mortal companions of Persephone. When Hades kidnapped her, they begged the gods for wings to search for her, and were cursed with their form when they failed. So technically, they weren't temptresses. At first, they were grieving, besties turned into half-bird semi-deities. Plot twist, right? Some fringe theorists even suggest sirens were warnings about the real dangers of coastal navigation, hidden reefs, unpredictable currents, fog. They weren't monsters, they were metaphors. Which, if true, means someone had to listen to that metaphor, die screaming just offshore, and go, "Yup, checks out." You pass a cracked window. The sea is right there again, close, hungry, and oddly rhythmic. It reflects the library's light in a shimmering mosaic. The sirens might have originally been bound to land their powers tied to specific rocks or islands. Some accounts describe them as unable to swim, trapped, singing in desperation, their songs more like prayers than traps. Still, something must have shifted. By the time of later Greek poets, sirens were gliding from island to island. By the time of the Romans, they'd gotten legs, or tails, or something sexier, depending on who was doing the carving. You flip through another scroll. A philosopher with too much free time, probably named Theophilus, or Crispinus, or something equally toga-worthy, debates whether sirens are part muses. His logic, they use music to transform the soul, which, sure, that tracks if your idea of transformation involves brain fog, sea foam, and drowning. You lean against a stone plinth, letting all these forms of sirens drift through you like mist. Feathered spirits, lonely mourners, vengeful demigoddesses, fish ladies with songwriting contracts. They've evolved, rewritten, recast by the needs of each new era, and always, always forbidden. You wonder briefly if any siren ever asked for this gig. Maybe one of them just liked humming to herself in a cave and woke up one day on a warning label. Another breeze wafts through. This one smells like brine parchment and crushed violets. You follow it deeper into the stacks where candlelight flickers over a mosaic floor, showing ships shattered against rocks while women watch from above, sad-eyed and silent. Maybe they didn't mean to lure them. Maybe they were just lonely. A final scroll unspools on its own. The last line simply reads, "Their voice was a memory no sailor could outrun." You pause. That sounds more like longing than murder. You let the scroll roll back up like a closing eye and drift toward the nearest open window. The ocean glows beneath a waning moon. The rocks don't sing, not yet, but something in your chest does. Something soft, something strange, something that hums with the weight of all those ancient confused depictions and the possibility that maybe the first siren didn't want to kill you. She just didn't want to be alone. You step out of the scroll-dusted library and straight into wind salty insistent and just a bit over-dramatic, like a stage actor who's late for a cue. The sky above is endless charcoal smudged with stars. Below, the sea churns like it's dreaming out loud. And somewhere in that aquatic monologue, she's waiting. Not a woman exactly, not a monster either. You're not sure what to call her yet, but the sailors who came before you tried their best. You walk along the edge of an old dock, the wood soft with centuries of sea air. There's a story lodged here, like a rusted nail, the tale of Odysseus and the wax. Everyone knows it. Hero ties himself to the mast, plugs his men's ears, sails past the sirens. Classic case of I want to hear the danger, but let's not die about it. You pause beside a weather-beaten anchor. It's half buried in algae and riddled with barnacles like it's tried to grow a second life. That anchor might have belonged to a ship like the Argo or something even more forgettable yet heroic in its own soggy way. Here's the fun part. The sirens didn't actually sing about sex or beauty. According to Homer, they promised knowledge. That's right, these lethal ladies lured men with book club level content. Things like, we know what happened at Troy. We've seen the end of your journey. And that's what undid the sailors' not desire but curiosity. Historians still argue whether this twist made the sirens more or less dangerous. Some say it elevated them from femme fatales to existential threats. Others say Homer just needed an allegory and threw in some bird ladies with spoilers. Either way, the message is clear. If you crave answers too badly, the sea will swallow you. You step carefully across the dock. A warped plank groans underfoot. The smell of old ropefish guts and salt hovers in the air like a soup you'd never order. Something flickers to your left. Not light, just movement. Or memory. You think about those wax plugs, how Odysseus ordered his men to wear them so they wouldn't hear the song. You wonder what they thought rowing blind to temptation while their captain wept and begged to be released. Must have been awkward. A niche scholar once claimed the wax and ears bit was a commentary on leadership protect your crew from what you yourself cannot resist. Another suggested it was just an early plug for artisanal beeswax. No one's really sure. You reach the end of the dock where a broken mast leans against a piling like a drunk friend. Nearby, a faded carving is scratched into the post, a stylized spiral part shell, part wave, part scream. The siren symbol maybe, or just a bored sailor's doodle. You sit. The dock creaks beneath you, cradling your weight like it remembers. The wind picks up. This time the sound is closer to a melody, low, rhythmic, just a few notes repeated more whisper than song. But you feel it, not just in your ears, in your chest. Your ribs seem to vibrate slightly like tuning forks trying to remember their purpose. You close your eyes. You imagine the ship Odysseus's vessel straining against the current, the sails taut with dying wind, him lashed to the mast vanes, bulging eyes wild with longing. Not for love, not even for survival, for meaning. That's what the sirens offered, a glimpse of the big picture. The cosmic punchline, the director's commentary on life. And then, nothing. Silence. Once the ship passed the siren's reach, the wind returned. The crew rode on. The song was gone. Forever. You open your eyes. The melody has stopped, or maybe it never started, but the echo remains. A buzzing in your bones. A weight behind your eyes. Like the aftertaste of an almost truth. A fisherman's net lies curled nearby, tangled and useless. You imagine someone trying to catch a siren with that. Would she have fought? Cursed laughed. Some say Odysseus's success marked the end of the sirens' reign, that when he heard them and lived, their power waned. They flung themselves into the sea in shame, or perhaps finally found peace, their mission complete. Or maybe they just evolved. Fringe theorists have proposed all kinds of successors, lighthouses, foghorns, emergency weather alerts. Things that warn us, that draw us in, that blur the line between safety and danger. Even YouTube recommendations have been compared to sirens, albeit with more clickbait and less feathers. The night deepens. The tide pulls in slowly, thick with secrets. You lie back on the dock staring up at constellations that ancient navigators once swore by. You trace the pattern of Cassiopeia, the vain queen who no doubt would have made a solid siren had she tried her luck offshore. Something inside you feels pulled not violently, but insistently, like a thread slowly unspooling from a sweater. It's not fear, it's not even wonder, it's invitation. You hum just once. The sound slips across the water like a pebble tossed gently into myth. Maybe somewhere someone hums back. You don't remember standing up, but somehow your feet are on the path again. Sandier this time, littered with seashells, cracked like tiny skulls. The shoreline stretches out beside you, curving into mist. Above, the stars are beginning to fade, replaced by a violet hush that might be morning or might be illusion. Either way, the sea's still singing. Tonight's debate, mermaids versus sirens. You've probably used the terms interchangeably, most people do, but if you said that out loud near a Renaissance monk or an ancient Greek sailor, you'd be in for a passionate argument with scrolls and maybe some passive-aggressive hymns. The distinction's murky like all things born of salt and story. Classical sirens, as you now know, had bird bodies and harp-like voices. Mermaids, meanwhile, were fish-tailed and usually mute in myth, though Disney has since given them quite the vocal upgrade. Historians still argue whether the two are evolution or confusion. Did the siren slowly become the mermaid, or were they always different species on the same cautionary menu? Some say Christian scholars deliberately blurred the line, turning every aquatic female into a cautionary tale for lust. Others say sailors just had bad eyesight and lonelier nights. You come across a rock pool. The water's clear still and suspiciously perfect, like someone's been using it to practice appearances. You crouch and peer in. Your reflection stares back, warped slightly. Behind it, something flits past. Not a fish. Too smooth. Too pale. You lean closer, and then it's gone. You blink. Nothing now but algae, a crab, and a chunk of old glass shaped like a heart. You pluck it from the water. It's cool and oddly heavy, like regret solidified. You tuck it into your pocket without knowing why. That's how it starts right. Sirens don't need to drag you under. They just have to make you carry a little of them with you. In medieval bestiaries, those wild illustrated animal encyclopedias filled with creatures both real and heavily exaggerated, mermaids and sirens often share a page. One notable entry shows a topless woman with fins instead of arms holding a comb and a mirror. Apparently, even in the 13th century, vanity was a theme. Fun fringe detail. Some medieval scribes claimed mermaids had the power to calm storms by singing, not cause them calm them. Total PR shift. Instead of destructive temptress, she's now a living barometer with excellent breath control. That's a resume skill, if ever there was one. You walk further, and the landscape changes subtly. The rocks are smoother here, sculpted by time and tide into seats. Natural amphitheater vibes. You wonder if sirens performed here. Maybe they had sets, encores. Maybe their voices once filled this hollow, like church bells. And maybe they didn't perform at all. Maybe they just mourned. Maybe the song wasn't meant for anyone. It was just what happened when grief had nowhere else to go. Somewhere inland, a gull screeches. It's the wrong pitch. No mystery there, but it pulls you back into your body just enough to feel the sand cooling under your feet. You think about sailors again, about those months at sea, the hunger, the heat, the endless blue horizon. You imagine what a voice might feel like after that. A voice promising rest, home. A name remembered. You reach a flat stone and sit. In the distance, the waves hush against the cliffs. It's quieter now. Not silent, but less urgent. You imagine a siren resting here, once legs or feathers or fins folded neatly. Alone. Not waiting for prey. Just tired. You wonder if the siren ever looked up at the stars and asked, "Why me?" The same way you've done. The same way we all have. A myth is just a truth that's been singing too long to speak plainly anymore. Another story surfaces in your memory, the French folk tale of Melusine, a woman with a fish or serpent tail who married a man under one condition: he could never see her on Saturdays. Naturally, he did. Naturally, she vanished. That's the template. Curiosity kills the love. The forbidden must stay forbidden. Sirens are reminders of that. Don't ask, don't look, don't listen too closely, or the illusion drowns. You lie back again. The sky is lighter. Pale streaks of rose comb the horizon. You trace shapes in them, a fin, a wing, a woman's mouth half open in song. You're not afraid anymore, but you're not quite safe either. Not from what you're becoming. A breeze ruffles your hair, soft, warm, a little damp. It smells like crushed thyme, whetstone, and something floral, violets again, or lavender. You don't turn around, you just close your eyes. Somewhere behind you, the sea exhales. You awaken, if waking is the right word, in a place where the sea has pulled back, revealing black stones slick with moss and thyme. Tide pools shimmer with lazy fish, and the occasional glint of something unnatural. Silver coins, lost teeth. You decide not to poke around. This is the kind of shoreline where things want to be found. And overhead, the sky churns into soft grays and faded indigos. The kind of light that turns water into mirrors and clouds into omens. A perfect setting for the singing stones of Sicily. You've heard of them, haven't you? Just off the coast of Italy, near the Strait of Messina, are the twin dangers Scylla and Charybdis, one a rock monster, the other a whirlpool that eats boats like breath mints. But just south of there lies a lesser-known myth that certain stones hum. Not metaphorically, audibly. And what they hum sounds a lot like sirens. You hop across some tide-slicked rocks, boots squishing slightly. One of the stones beneath you vibrates, not a tremor exactly, but more like a cat's purr. You crouch. Press your ear to it. There's a tone. Low, resonant, almost bored. And underneath it, the slightest waver, like a voice warming up. Historians still argue whether these reports were true geological phenomena wind rushing through coastal caves, or just sailors' tales fermented over months at sea. Some fringe geologists propose Aeolian tones, where wind plays natural rock formations like flutes. Others insist it's the sound of tectonic memory, the earth groaning about how long it's had to babysit humanity. The ancient Greeks, though, had zero patience for science. They heard music in the stone and said, "Yup. That's sirens trapped under the cliff." Moving on. And maybe they were right. You sit near one particularly flat rock, sea-smoothed and shaped like a lopsided harp. There's a symbol carved into it, an open mouth with waves spilling out. It looks hastily done, as if someone knew they didn't have time to finish. Or maybe the stone sang back, and they got distracted. Legend says that these Sicilian stones marked the last resting place of the original sirens. After Odysseus resisted their call, the myth goes, they were cursed to become part of the land itself, still singing, but no longer free. An eternal mixtape with no audience. You tap your fingers against the rock. It responds not with music, but with a faint warmth, like recognition. You wonder how many others have come here seeking something truth, escape, and ending. Most left disappointed, some didn't leave at all. The sea shifts. You glance up to find the tide creeping in, cautious, deliberate, not in a rush to drown you, just a gentle reminder that time doesn't wait, even when the stories do. You stretch bones creaking like sails in the wind. You feel older, not physically, just mythologically, like you've spent too long in the pages of forgotten lore, and now it's leaving sediment in your joints. Another gust of wind whistles through the rocks, and for just a moment it harmonizes perfectly with the humming stone beneath your hand. The result is musical, eerie, beautiful, and gone too quickly. You smile despite yourself. Maybe that's the secret, the song was never meant to last, just to be noticed. You recall a detail from an obscure Roman text, the claim that sailors who heard the stones and survived would forever dream in melody, that every choice they made afterward would feel like part of a chorus they couldn't quite remember. Some called it a blessing, others called it madness with good sound design. One last breeze coasts in. You close your eyes. Somewhere in the distance, the cliffside moans too deep to be the wind, too deliberate to be the earth. A note, a single drawn-out syllable. It could mean return. It could mean beware. Or maybe it's just a tired voice asking softly, "Did you hear me?" You answer with silence. Your footsteps crunch gently over loose gravel, now the terrain changing again as you move inland just a little. It's still coastal, still kissed with salt, but drier, almost echoey. You find yourself walking toward a structure half collapsed, draped in ivy, and thick with birdsong. Or is it song? You pause. No birds in sight, just a tone, a thread of melody barely audible winding between ruined columns and worn stone benches. You follow it, of course. That's what you do. And then you see it carved into a crumbling wall is a list. Or maybe a hymn. It's in some dialect you can't read, but the symbols look rhythmic. Like musical notation or ancient graffiti with pretensions. You can't help wondering what was on the siren's set list. Because here's the twist, those deadly tunes that turned strong men into soggy wreckage weren't improvised. According to the Homeric hymns, sirens had specific knowledge and targeted messaging. They knew your name, your history, your secrets. They sang them back to you in harmonies shaped like memory and guilt. Historians still argue whether the siren songs were personal to each listener or whether it was more of a greatest hits collection of nautical regrets. One fringe theory, this one from an unusually poetic marine biologist, suggests sirens tune themselves like whales do, adjusting pitch and tone based on who was nearby, which is both beautiful and unsettling. You step through the overgrown ruin, brushing past wild fennel and thistles. On a pedestal, a weather-worn lyre rests snapped in half and covered in barnacles. It couldn't possibly make music anymore, but you still imagine it does. You sit, and you listen. Nothing at first, just the low rustle of weeds and the soft scolding sigh of the wind. Then so faint, it feels like memory you hear a melody. It isn't in your ears exactly. It's in you. Like something you forgot you loved, like a voice from a dream right before waking. And it's not random, it's deliberate, familiar. It sings not of longing or death, but of choices. A road you didn't take, a letter you never sent, a question you avoided. And that's when it hits you. The siren song isn't beautiful because of the notes. It's beautiful because it's yours. You lean back against a sun-warmed rock, eyes closed. Your breath slows. You think about ancient mariners hearing that same tune. Not literally the same, of course, but emotionally identical. That's the trick. The sirens didn't just sing you listened, and that was the beginning of the end. In one old folktale, a sailor escaped the sirens not by plugging his ears or tying himself to a mast, but by singing back. He matched their melody with one of his own, a song about home, about warm bread and old laughter. The sirens paused, not because they were impressed, because they remembered. It's a fringe tale mostly dismissed as a bard's embellishment, but it feels true in a sleepy, fog-draped way. The music fades. You rise. The sun is high now, casting clean shadows. The ruin stands behind you silent. The lyre, too, says nothing, but you still hear it faint and internal, like a memory of something that never happened but should have. You step back toward the shoreline, the melody retreating with you. You hum a few notes under your breath, nothing fancy, just what's left in your chest after all that listening. And as you pass a broken statue of a woman with feathered wings and wide, knowing eyes, you swear her mouth is open just a little wider than before. You keep walking. The path grows narrower, now bordered by thorny vines and low-hanging mist. The air thickens not with heat, but with history. Each breath you take feels like borrowing someone else's memory. You follow a trail of seashells cracked underfoot, leading downhill toward a cove carved from black stone and myth. This is where the forbidden tale begins. You step carefully over the threshold of the story, one not found in textbooks, but whispered by firelight and passed down like a warning in disguise. It's the legend of a siren who broke the rules, who didn't just sing to a man, but loved him, or tried to. She has no agreed-upon name. In Greek fragments, she's called Ithra. In Celtic driftwood carvings, she's the weeper beneath the waves. One Persian sailor simply referred to her as the voice that touched my name. You reach the cove's edge and stop. The water here is calmer, almost shy. The cliff face curves inward like a cupped hand shielding this pocket of ocean from judgment. You sit at its lip legs dangling. A shell nearby seems carved into the shape of an ear, listening, always listening. So here's how it goes. Long ago, because all true stories happen long ago, a siren heard something strange in the voice of a sailor. Not just fear or desire or curiosity, but recognition. He didn't hurl himself into the sea. He spoke. He asked her name. Historians still argue whether this tale was a misreading of a much older Babylonian myth or a metaphor wrapped in ocean-scented poetry. Some say it's a warning about attachment. Others claim it's the only surviving evidence that sirens were more than monsters, that they were once capable of love. You look out across the cove, imagining the siren waiting here, just beyond the reach of the tide. Her voice frayed from years of melody, her eyes wide with something softer than hunger. She knew she wasn't allowed. Sirens do not feel for their quarry. That breaks the contract, but rules mean little when you're lonely. The sailor his name lost as mortal names often are returned again and again, not with ships or gifts, but with stories. He told her about his village, about the smell of baking bread, about the color of the sky during spring rains. She didn't understand it all, but she listened. And then one night he sang back. His song was clumsy, off-key, filled with pauses, but it was real, and it broke something open in her, not violently, just enough to make space. Enough for her to wonder what might happen if she didn't let him drown. You glance down at your reflection in the still water. The surface trembles, not with current, but with feeling. It ripples outward like a voice longing to be heard. You lean closer. For a moment, your reflection isn't quite your own. The eyes are too wide, the expression too knowing. And there, just beneath the surface, something moves. You blink. It's gone. The story never ends happily, of course. Forbidden things rarely do. The sea does not forgive sentiment. The other sirens found out. Maybe they warned her. Maybe they tried to stop her. Or maybe it was the ocean itself that delivered the judgment. Some versions say the sailor was dragged under anyway, that love made her hesitate, and hesitation meant death. Others claim he was spared, washed ashore, with memories too sweet to bear, left wandering inland with a heart half broken by beauty. In the most generous versions, she gave up her song entirely, became silent, took the curse into herself, and vanished beneath the waves. Not gone, just unheard. You let your fingers trail through the water. It's cold, but not unkind. A distant melody flickers beneath your skin, brief, uncertain. It doesn't demand. It invites. That was her final gift, maybe a new kind of song. One that didn't drown. One that simply asked, "Will you stay a moment?" And even now, the echo lingers. You leave the cove behind slowly, like backing out of a memory. The wind brushes past your ear with something like a sigh, or maybe it's the ghost of a melody you're starting to forget. The path takes you through dunes now soft and crumbling, where scattered relics poke through the sand. Bits of rope, half-buried coins, and something that looks suspiciously like a sailor's journal, water-warped beyond salvation. You pause beside a weathered driftwood log worn silver gray by the tide. Carved into its surface are tiny images, anchors, suns, a face with long hair and empty eyes. Someone spent time here recording what they feared, or maybe what they missed. And that's the theme tonight, isn't it? Fear and memory. Which brings us to a less romantic corner of the siren myth, sailor superstitions. You kick through a pile of shells, thinking about how ancient mariners, roughened by salt and solitude, built entire worlds of ritual to stay sane. Before radar and radio, you relied on instincts and luck. And sometimes, to fight off the sea's call, you tattooed symbols on your body. Fish scales for speed, eyes for protection, stars to guide you home. And if you were really paranoid, a bell on your belt meant to confuse evil spirits or warn you when you were walking straight into a siren's trap. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were purely psychological tricks or had some encoded logic from centuries of trial and error. A few fringe researchers even believe that certain tattoos function like folk GPS, passed down, modified, mapped into skin instead of scroll. You run your fingers across your wrist, no ink there, but maybe something invisible hums beneath it. A rhythm, a tide. You pass a tangled fishing net left to rot in the sand, its threads catching in the sea breeze like a makeshift harp. It whistles gently, not a siren's song, but maybe a tribute, or a warning, or both. One sailor's log from the 1700s mentions the hour of quiet a time just before dawn, when the sea goes still and the voices grow loudest. He described it as a moment when the veil between land and deep memory thinned, when a man might hear a lullaby meant just for him. He also claimed turning his shirt inside out warded off such voices. Was he mad? Probably, but maybe not entirely wrong. You spot a stack of stones arranged deliberately at the path's edge, someone's shrine perhaps, balanced offerings to the sea. A cracked compass rests at its base, needle rusted in place, always pointing out toward nothing. You place the heart-shaped shard of glass you found earlier on top. The stack doesn't wobble. The sea accepts it. Not all superstitions were protective. Some were preparatory. Sailors left offerings to sirens, pearls, sweet oils, bits of bone carved into flutes. They didn't fear the sirens exactly, they respected them. As you would a storm or a cliff or a letter that arrives too late to change anything. One fringe belief from the Baltic claims that if you sing before the siren does, she'll listen instead of call, that she might sit beside you quiet and curious. And then, when your song ends, she'll simply nod and disappear. You hum a bar or two of something unremarkable, just a tune from childhood maybe, a lullaby. The breeze pauses. You smile. You crest the last dune and see the sea again, wide and pale now under the rising sun. No voices, no danger, just water stretching so far it almost curves back on itself. You sit letting the wind comb your hair. You think about sailors lost, about those who made it home and never spoke of what they heard, about the rituals, the carvings, the songs sung beneath breath. And you wonder, was it ever about avoiding the siren? Or was it always about making peace with the desire to listen? The sea doesn't answer, but it doesn't have to. The beach thins into stony paths and cracked flagstones now, as if the land can't quite decide whether it wants to be natural or remembered. You follow it without questioning, guided by the hush in your chest and the weight of stories still sinking into your bones. Up ahead stands a small, crumbling chapel half swallowed by vines and sea fog. The door yawns open like a secret too tired to stay closed. You step inside. It smells like candle wax and damp stone. Dust motes hang suspended in shafts of morning light. And just above the altar in place of a crucifix or saint is a mosaic of a woman with a fish's tail, gold tiles flaking from her hair, eyes closed, hands raised in song. It's jarring and strangely reverent. Welcome to the odd corner of religious history where sirens appear in Scripture. You wouldn't think the church would want anything to do with singing fish women who murder sailors, but history is rarely neat. In medieval manuscripts and cathedral carvings, sirens show up usually as cautionary symbols, warning against temptation. A mermaid holding a comb and mirror wasn't just a beauty motif, she was a walking sermon. Vanity leads to destruction, they said, also maybe drowning. Historians still argue whether these ecclesiastical sirens were adapted from pagan images or consciously rebranded to scare congregations straight. Some even believe that early monks co-opted them from ancient myth as metaphors for heresy. If the song draws you away from Scripture, it must be evil, especially if you enjoy it. You sit on one of the cracked pews. A hymn book lies open nearby. Its pages are water-stained and warped, but you can make out a few lines. She sang in tongues not meant for men, and still they came again. You exhale. The weight of that line sits gently on your shoulders. There's something deeply human in the contradiction, knowing a thing will destroy you and wanting it anyway. One bizarre detail often overlooked: some medieval abbots claimed sirens could enter convents unnoticed, that they disguised themselves as nuns humming sacred songs just off-key enough to unsettle the choir. A fringe theory for sure, but it stuck. In one French manuscript, a bishop warns his priest to watch the sea for signs of singing women with hidden fins. You glance around the chapel. For a place meant to condemn sirens, it feels oddly peaceful, reverent even, as if the line between worship and warning has blurred over time. Maybe it always was. Behind the altar is a shallow basin. You peer in. Water collects there still and reflective. For a split second, your reflection shimmers. And there's someone beside you. Not clearly. Not quite. Just a blur. A curve of hair. A tilt of the head. Then gone. You blink, and the chapel is just stone again. Empty. You move toward a side window where stained glass filters light in deep sea greens and soft golds. It depicts Jonah and the whale, sure, but in the corner, small and almost smug, is a mermaid with a book in her lap. You chuckle. Who let her in? You press your forehead to the cool glass. Outside, the ocean pulses softly, indifferent to your thoughts, but never quite absent from them. You can't help but wonder, what if the sirens weren't villains? What if they were keepers of forgotten truths, guardians of choices no longer available? Some ancient Gnostic texts now lost or burned hinted at sea spirits who knew the names of stars, who whispered secrets to the waves. Perhaps they were sirens. Perhaps they were saints. Perhaps the difference was always branding. You leave the chapel without touching anything else, as though to disturb it would be to wake something that prefers to sleep. Back outside, the light is warmer, but the air still hums faintly with the memory of song. Not loud, not dangerous, just present, like grace, or guilt, or that feeling when a melody from childhood sneaks into your throat and you're not sure if you're remembering it or becoming it. You walk on and the chapel behind you fades into the mist. No one chases you, no one sings. But you're still listening. The path bends once more, narrowing into a ribbon of earth that threads through jagged outcrops and low-blown heather. The wind picks up again sharper now, carrying the scent of brine and something else, something odd. You wrinkle your nose. It's fishy, sure, but with an undertone of wet fur and swamp grass, like a merman's cologne gone tragically wrong. You climb over a slope and find yourself staring at a tide pool larger than any you've seen before. The water within is glassy dark and motionless, and lounging just beside it is a statue. You squint. Not a statue. A manatee. Well, technically, a carved manatee. Stone, but deeply loved, judging by the offerings laid at its flippers coins, driftwood hearts, and one soggy sandwich. You've just stumbled into a less flattering chapter of siren lore, Christopher Columbus's Ugly Mermaids. Let's rewind. In 1493, while sailing near the Dominican Republic, Columbus recorded in his journal that he saw 3 mermaids. Excited, he wrote they rose well out of the sea, but then tragically added they were not as beautiful as they are depicted, for somehow, in the face, they look like men. Yikes. Historians still argue whether this was a case of poor visibility heat stroke or the most awkward Tinder swipe in history, but the consensus is he saw manatees, gentle, floaty, whisker-faced manatees. And in his defense, they do have human-like eyes and a vaguely feminine torso if you squint very, very hard and ignore biology. You sit beside the pool, thinking about how badly we want stories to be true. Even the weird ones, especially the weird ones. Columbus had likely read about sirens, had wanted to see one, so when something vaguely shapish popped up from the waves, he declared it mythical, because sometimes belief fills in the blanks better than eyesight ever could. A fringe theory because, of course, there is suggests that Columbus and others knew what they saw wasn't beautiful, but romanticized it anyway. That sirens were never meant to be seductive in appearance, but in idea. An idea you couldn't resist even when it looked like a chubby sea potato. You chuckle maybe a little too loudly. A bird overhead startles and flies off offended. You dip your fingers into the pool. It's colder than you expect. Still, heavy. You feel it pressing back, not threateningly, just with gravity, with memory. This pool might have once held a ship's shadow, or a sailor's voice, or a siren who laughed when she learned what humans called mermaids. Maybe she found the whole thing hilarious. A nearby plaque, weathered to near illegibility, bears a single quote, "Even the gods must squint to see beauty clearly." You sit with that for a while. Let it hum beneath your ribs. Because isn't that the truth? We mythologize what we can't focus on. We blur the lines, smooth the features, wrap danger in silk and teeth. And, sometimes, we call a manatee a mermaid. You stand and brush sand off your palms. The manatee statue watches you with the eternal patience of sea cows everywhere. You give it a little bow, not out of mockery, but out of shared understanding. The sea remembers everything, even our mistakes. As you move on, the wind shifts behind you, swirling through the rocky hollows like a voice trying to warm up. You wonder if the sirens ever laughed. You kind of hope they did. The path veers northward, now climbing gently up a slope of frost-kissed stone. The air grows sharper, the vegetation sparser, and your breath fogs in front of you with each step. You pull your coat tighter around your shoulders, but the cold here isn't just from weather, it's the kind that seeps from old stories. And in these northern winds, a different kind of song rides. You're entering the realm of Norse legend, where sirens wore different names and moods, where sea spirits didn't sing to seduce, but to warn or curse. Or in the most cheerful stories to hum lullabies before dragging you beneath the ice. The Vikings had no clear equivalent to the Greek sirens, but that didn't stop them from weaving tales of sea women with pale skin and kelp hair, who whispered in storm winds and guided longships toward rocks with soft, melancholy voices. They weren't glamorous, They weren't even always visible, just present. One Icelandic saga mentions margagur sea hags, or mermaid-like beings with fishtails and iron claws, who would cry like infants to lure men overboard. Not so much forbidden love as accidental babysitting, followed by immediate drowning. Historians still argue whether these creatures were inherited from older European water spirits or shaped entirely by the Norse experience with an ocean that routinely tried to kill them. The cold seas were a different kind of god, merciless, gray, and indifferent. It makes sense their sirens would whisper rather than wail. You crest the hill and find a stone circle, ancient and half-sunken, the kind that makes archaeologists write very careful papers while quietly shivering. There are symbols etched into the rock's waves, eyes runes you don't recognize. At the center lies a shallow pool, frozen over. You kneel beside it. The ice isn't thick. You can see through to dark water swirling lazily beneath. And just faintly, so faintly, you think you hear it again. Not a song, a humming, low, breathless, like a mother trying to calm a child through gritted teeth. You don't hum back this time. You just listen. A fringe account from a 13th century Greenlandic fisherman tells of a sea woman who cried tears that turned to pearls, who waited near fjords for ships that never came. He claimed her voice was like wind wrapped in wet cloth. He also claimed she appeared in his dreams for 12 winters straight and aged backward each time. Make of that what you will. You stand and place your hand on one of the stones. It's cold, but humming too, just faintly vibrating beneath your palm like a distant engine or a memory refusing to die quietly. The Norse believed that names had power. To know a creature's true name was to bind or banish it. But the sea spirits, they had no names. That was the point. They forgot themselves over time. Or maybe they never had names to begin with. Maybe the act of naming was too human, too hopeful. The snow begins to fall softly now, and you close your eyes. The flakes melt on your lashes, warm at first, then cold as they slide down your cheeks. You imagine a long ship wood groaning, sails heavy, cutting through black water as a figure barely visible hovers on the ice ahead, mouth moving without sound. Would you turn back? Or would you lean closer? You smile faintly. We all lean closer. That's the point. You start walking again, leaving the stone circle behind. The wind follows, playful and biting. You think of sailors wrapping themselves in furs, etching runes into their shields, muttering protection charms under their breath, not to keep out the sirens, but to keep in their own longing. Because the voice wasn't always out there. Sometimes it was already inside you. You descend from the frozen slope and the world softens. The rocks round out, the wind grows hushed, and everything takes on a strange stillness, like you've entered the inside of a held breath. You follow a narrow path that winds downward, spiraling into a hollow of smooth stone and still air. No crashing surf here, just deep, pulsing quiet. This is where the sound lives. You step into a space that feels like a natural amphitheater, curved cliffs rising around you, slick with moss and mist. There's a pool at the center, black as ink, not a ripple on its surface. And hovering just above the water is a sound. It isn't a song. Not really. It's a tone. Low, endless, the sort of vibration that makes your teeth hum and your stomach shift slightly in rebellion. It's the kind of sound you feel before you hear, and it's coming from beneath the water. Welcome to the mystery of deep-sea acoustics, where modern science meets ancient myth in a foggy handshake of confusion. You sit near the edge, listening. The sound isn't beautiful, not in the way siren songs are usually described. It's more like the engine hum of the earth. And maybe it is. Scientists have spent decades trying to decode the origin of these oceanic vibrations, strange low-frequency noises called the bloop Julia slowdown, and others all recorded in the deep Pacific. They pulse, they echo, they seem intentional. Historians still argue whether these sounds inspired siren myths or are simply the planet groaning under its own gravity. Fringe theorists suggest they are sirens, just in a form no one expected, not singing women, but sound itself. Long, unending calls from the depths, luring not with melody, but with curiosity. You lean forward. The pool below reflects nothing, now just endless dark. You whisper something just to hear your own voice, but the pool answers. A soft tone, almost like a reply. Not a word, but a feeling. like a hand placed gently on your chest. You lie back on a stone, the cold seeping into your spine. Your ears tune out everything else, the wind, the trees, even your own heartbeat. All that's left is that one sustained note rising and falling like breath beneath a lullaby. Some cultures believed that sirens didn't sing at all but vibrated, that their power was resonance, not melody, that they matched your internal rhythm and pulled you gently out of yourself like a magnet drawing blood toward iron. One sailor's diary found waterlogged off the coast of Tierra del Fuego described it as a hum from the belly of the world. So honest, I thought it would crack my ribs open. You understand that now. You close your eyes, and in the sound you hear echoes of things not meant for speech. Regret, homesickness, the way your name sounded once said by someone who doesn't say it anymore. The siren doesn't need lyrics, she just needs time and silence. And you're giving her both. A thought drifts across your mind like seaweed across the surface. Maybe the sirens evolved because the world got too loud. Maybe they had to stop singing and start humming just to be heard through the noise of cities' engines, news cycles, and heartbreak. You sit up slowly. The sound fades the moment you move, like you broke the spell by remembering your body again. The pool lies still, unbothered. You touch your chest. The rhythm there is your own again. You leave the hollow quietly, not out of fear but respect. The sound lingers faint and steady, like a memory you're not sure you had. And you think maybe the sirens never wanted to drown you. Maybe they just wanted you to listen. The terrain tilts once more upward this time as you wind through cliffs that rise in jagged, uneven steps, like the spine of something ancient, fossilized mid-breath. The sky above is dimmer again, bruised with approaching dusk. Somewhere below the ocean murmurs, but you're heading away from it now, inland, towards something less natural, less safe. You follow a narrow trail of sun-bleached bones and salt-crusted pebbles until it opens suddenly into a plateau overlooking a wide expanse of sea and sky. But that's not what catches your eye. It's the island. Far in the distance, just visible through the mist, floats a shape on the horizon, long, low, oddly symmetrical. It shouldn't be there. No lights, no sails, just stillness. You found what some maps never dared mark, the Forbidden Islands. In ancient nautical lore, there were lands said to appear only when the moon and tide agreed, places that shimmered into being for brief windows of time, then vanished as if swallowed by myth. Some were home to gods, others to monsters, and a few, just a few, were where sirens retreated after men stopped listening. You sit on a rock staring at the silhouette. It doesn't move, but it doesn't need to. Its presence hums undeniable. Historians still argue whether such islands were pure fiction or garbled echoes of real uncharted landforms, reefs glimpsed through storm or mirage. But the more interesting argument is what happened on these islands. Some scrolls say they were places of worship, others exile. One obscure Arabic manuscript describes them as lands where song holds shape. You can almost feel it now that hum again, not from the earth this time, but from the air. The island is singing, and not with a voice, with a presence. It doesn't beckon, it doesn't seduce. It simply waits. In certain Greek texts, there's a fragment possibly mistranslated that tells of an island where sirens were imprisoned after losing their powers. Not by gods, by time. Their voices weakened, their wings clipped, they turned inward. Their song became terrain, hills and valleys, cliffs and caves that echoed only for those who already believed. A fringe theory drawn from the margins of a forgotten sea captain's journal suggests that such islands were not fixed locations but migratory, like whales, or guilt, that they surfaced near those ready to hear them, or those who were running from something familiar. You look again. The island is still there, but is it an island, or is it a memory that the sea hasn't decided to let go of yet? There are no boats to reach it, no bridge, just tide and imagination, and maybe that's enough. You close your eyes, and in the hush between breaths, you imagine walking its shores, black sand beneath your feet, stones that hum your name trees with leaves shaped like mouths. No words, just tone. You wonder who else has seen it. Who else has sat here heart-tight with recognition? You wonder how many swam for it and whether they arrived or sank. You open your eyes. The island is fading just slightly into mist. You don't panic. That's how these things go. It was never yours to keep, just yours to notice. You stand and whisper a small thank you toward the horizon, not because you expect an answer, but because something in you feels heard. And maybe that's what the siren always wanted. You descend from the overlook with careful steps, your body still vibrating faintly from the memory of the forbidden island. It doesn't haunt you, not exactly. It lingers more like a tune half remembered, the kind that surfaces while brushing your teeth or staring out of the window, and you're not sure if you heard it or invented it. The land flattens into rocky ground littered with driftwood and broken pottery. Something once stood here, walls maybe, or a ship's frame long since surrendered to wind and salt. But there nestled in the rubble is a journal, or what's left of one. Pages curled, ink bled into obscurity, but one page remains legible pressed between sea-stiff covers. You sit on a dry patch of stone and begin to read. The handwriting is cramped urgent. The words bleed together like secrets spilled too fast. It tells the story of a shipwreck, of a storm that cracked the sky open like an egg, of a night unnamed washed ashore on an island that wasn't on any chart. And there, the story shifts, grows softer. The night describes being lifted from the surf by someone. He never names her, only calls her she of the salt voice. He writes of waking to the scent of kelp and violet, of wounds washed with salted honey, of a hand that never trembled even when his fever broke. He doesn't know what she is. He doesn't ask. Instead, he listens, and every night she hums, not a song of temptation, a lullaby, a melody that winds around the edges of his pain and makes it bearable. The night writes that he wanted to stay, to never leave, but there was a pull inside him, duty perhaps, or pride that insisted he return to the world that forgot how to listen. He writes her a final note, tucks it into the rocks, and swims for the mainland. Whether he made it is unclear. Historians still argue over the authenticity of this account. Some call it poetic nonsense. Others claim it's one of the oldest records of a siren-human relationship, told not as tragedy, but as tenderness. You close the journal hands, trembling just slightly, because it's not the love story that moves you. It's the gentleness, the idea that maybe the siren did not want to keep him, only heal him. You rise and wander further into the clearing. There are scattered remnants everywhere, more journals, bits of armor, lengths of faded ribbon tied to driftwood poles, like a shrine, but not for mourning, for remembering. A fringe theory, unpublished, obscure, likely scribbled in someone's dream journal, suggests that sirens didn't lure sailors to their doom. They collected the broken ones, the exiled, the ones who couldn't go home, that their song was not a trap, but a question. Are you tired? And the drowning, maybe it was release. You walk along the edge of the sea again, waves curling at your ankles. The sky above shifts to mauve and copper. Sunset is approaching, not loud, not grand, just steady, like a lullaby of color. You pause near a broken mast, half buried in sand. Scratched into the wood in a language barely surviving time are the words, "She sang me back together." You stay there a long time, listening, not for the siren's voice this time, but for your own heartbeat, finally slowing down. You leave the shore behind and find yourself climbing a craggy trail flanked by thorn brush and silence. The sea remains in earshot but distant now, like a song playing in another room, muffled by walls you can't break through. Above, the sky has slipped into an early twilight blue. You keep walking, drawn toward a stone tower ahead, its silhouette oddly familiar. The doors half open, weather-beaten, you enter. Inside, dust echo candle nubs and stacked scrolls bundled with twine. You move slowly, careful not to disturb the quiet. This was no lighthouse. It's a record hall, or what's left of one. Carvings line the walls, scratched deep by practiced hands, ships capsizing faces, howling women singing from cliffs. You're not the first visitor, but you may be the last. In the center of the room stands a pulpit stone and stained. On it, a collection of parchment marked with seals, notary stamps, and the weight of bureaucratic disapproval. Welcome to one of history's strangest footnotes, the Siren Trials. Yes, you read that correctly. There were times, most notably in 14th century Europe, when religious councils and legal authorities treated sirens not as myths, but as moral threats. Sermons were given, documents were drafted. In one case, a coastal village in southern Italy formally excommunicated a siren. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor performance or genuine belief. The trial record survives barely. It claims a woman of the sea tempted 3 men to leap from their boats and abandon their homes, never to return. The church, ever fond of making points through ritual, decided to condemn her publicly. Of course she didn't show up. You leaf through the faded scrolls. They're wildly inconsistent. One bishop warns that sirens enter dreams. Another insists they live in fresh water, not the sea. A third claims he saw one weeping in the reeds behind his chapel. No two agree, but they all seem afraid, not of death, but of longing. You move to a window and look out over the hills. The wind has picked up again, rattling a shutter behind you. It sounds a bit like a breath, or maybe a chuckle. Because really, what does it mean to put a myth on trial? One fringe historian fired from 3 universities, and now comfortably anonymous on a blog, once wrote, "Sirens were not condemned because they killed. They were condemned because they reminded men of what they wanted and could not name." You understand that now? The scrolls here aren't warnings. They're confessions, scrawled not by victims but by those who returned, survivors, listeners. Each scroll reads like a journal entry. She sang my mother's voice back to me. She knew the name I never told anyone. I remembered how to weep. And you wonder, was that the true sin? To feel something so deeply, the world you returned to felt shallow by comparison. You take one final look around the tower, the pulpit, the stacked scrolls, the carved warnings that now feel more like invitations. You leave quietly, pulling the door shut behind you. The wind picks up again, brushing your cheek like a soft hand. You hum just once. The note vanishes into the air. But the echo stays. The path away from the tower curls downward in long, loose spirals, like a ribbon unraveling from a forgotten parcel. You descend slowly, careful of loose stones and old thoughts. The air has changed again, thinner now, more intellectual somehow. Less myth, more museum. And at the bend of the trail, you find what you half expected. A wooden building, glass windows, polished brass plaque. You've arrived at the Enlightenment. Not the spiritual kind, the European kind. Late 17th to early 19th century, the age of wigs, quills, and men with deeply suspicious facial hair, claiming that logic would solve everything, including apparently sirens. You step inside. The floorboards creak politely. Shelves line the walls, packed with leather-bound tomes in orderly rows. Candlelight flickers behind crystal domes. In the center, a display case with a dried, grim-looking object inside, labeled neatly in script. Siren-proven fraud, London 1783. You squint. It's a monkey torso sewn to a fishtail. You sigh. Welcome to the era of Enlightenment debunking, where almost every story was subjected to scalpel scandal or sarcastic footnotes. The Enlightenment thinkers weren't against myth. They just wanted it filed, measured, and preferably disproven before tea. Natural philosophers, early scientists began cataloging every strange tale from the seas. And sirens. They didn't fare well. Historians still argue whether the debunkings came from genuine skepticism or simply the era's obsession with domesticating the world's shrinking wonder into facts that fit in bookshelves. But the results were predictable. Sirens were reclassified as manatees, hallucinations, or lies told by lonely sailors who missed their wives. Or their rum. You walk slowly along a row of display cases. One contains a woodcut titled "The Mermaid Hoax of Bristol," showing a man charging a shilling to peek at what turned out to be a painted log. Another display explains how naval captains warned against oceanic delusions, encouraging their men to read moral philosophy instead. Because nothing stirs the soul like a stern lecture from John Locke. One fringe Enlightenment thinker, Jean-Claude Laroche, was less skeptical. In his unpublished diary, he wrote of encountering a woman near the coast of Marseille who sang in 3 tones at once. He believed she was not a creature of superstition, but a lost instrument of natural harmony. He was quietly institutionalized a year later. His harp, however, is here, its strings replaced with strands of seaweed. No one knows who did it. You settle into a padded bench, letting the flickering lights play across the pages of a worn copy of On Oceanic Anomalies. In it, a footnote suggests that the siren myth reflects nothing more than the mariner's yearning for narrative in an otherwise empty sea. You close the book gently. They weren't wrong. Not completely. The ocean is empty in many ways. Vast. Indifferent. a blue that stretches forever without answers. But maybe that's why the siren exists, not to fill the sea, but to give it a voice. You step back outside into fading daylight. The wind carries with it the crisp scent of paper wax and something older, deeper. The Enlightenment men tried to extinguish her, but they forgot one thing: you can't unhear a song. You can dismiss it, you can classify it, but you can't make it stop echoing. You hum softly as you walk, one hand brushing the brass railing along the stairs. The melody is simple, familiar. It doesn't ask for belief, only presence. And in the spaces between science and silence, the siren waits. Not for proof, but for listeners. The light is dimming now, and the trail before you twists into a grove of leaning trees, their branches arching above like the ribs of a long-dead leviathan. The wind has quieted. Even the sea seems to hold its breath. It feels like you've stepped into the hush between verses of a song, a pause so full it becomes its own kind of music. And through this hush, you hear whispers, not siren songs, not melodies, but words, familiar ones twisted slightly, from pamphlets, from proclamations, from speeches written not with ink, but with fear disguised as metaphor. You've entered the political chapter of the siren story. You settle onto a flat stone half buried in moss and unroll a brittle parchment hanging from a nearby tree by silk thread. The heading reads, "Seducers of the Nation on the Dangers of Female Influence and Maritime Weakness." Ah, yes. The Enlightenment may have tried to scientifically dismiss sirens, but the centuries that followed found a better use, turning them into symbols. During the Renaissance and well into modernity, sirens were increasingly used as political metaphors, emblems of temptation, destruction, and loss of control, not just over the self, but over empires. In 16th century Venice, one pamphlet likened France to a siren singing false peace while dragging us into foreign wars. In England, Queen Elizabeth was once defended against accusations of being a siren herself, powerful, unmarried, and worst of all, persuasive. Historians still argue whether the siren metaphor was applied more out of misogyny or xenophobia, likely both. What mattered was the image: a beautiful voice pulling noblemen off course, distracting them from their purpose, weakening their grip on the tiller of civilization. You flip the parchment. On the back, a crude sketch of a woman with serpent hair and scrolls clutched in her claws. Across her chest, the word revolution, because why not blame political upheaval on fishwomen with nice voices? One fringe political theorist in the 1800s claimed that every empire collapses only when its leaders have heard the siren's call of indulgence. He never defined indulgence, but he was often seen at expensive brothels. So, interpret that as you will. You walk deeper into the grove where more scrolls dangle like warning signs. One depicts a siren with a crown, her tail coiled around a globe. Another shows a drowning man labeled truth and a smiling siren labeled public opinion. You pause. Because it hits you, now the siren wasn't feared for her voice. She was feared for her power. The power to change direction, to pause a voyage, to make someone say, "Wait, what if we don't want to go where we're headed?" That's not seduction. That's influence. You sit on a root twisted into a perfect seat and remember a story from a Caribbean folk tradition rarely told, mostly sung. It speaks of a siren who appeared to enslaved sailors in the dead of night. She didn't sing them to death, she sang them to freedom, told them the stars would guide them, told them they remembered how to swim. That version never made it into European scrolls, but it lingers. You look up. The sky is streaked with bronze and slate now. The grove is still holding its paper truths. You don't need to read every one. You know now. The siren doesn't live only in myth or melody. She lives in ideas, in the moment before someone changes their mind, in the pause between certainty and doubt. She sings not just to lure, but to remind that there's always another shore. If you're willing to turn the ship, the grove narrows behind you, its paper messages rustling like pages turned by wind that isn't really wind. You emerge onto an open stretch of coast, but this time the sea doesn't dominate the view. What you see first, what you can't not see, is a cage. A literal one. Iron bars rusted, warped by salt and time, but unmistakably man-made. At its base, a plaque chipped by the elements. You lean in and read. Fiji Mermaid, 1842, London Exhibition. Ah, of course. You've arrived at the Victorian era, a time of manners, corsets empire, and an insatiable appetite for the strange. The Victorians were obsessed with sirens, but not as creatures of myth or metaphor. They wanted them on display. You walk past velvet ropes, tattered now, weathered posters flapping in the breeze. One reads, "See the marvelous half-woman, half-fish, a wonder of nature or a warning of God." It's hard to tell which sold more tickets. Inside the cage, resting on a silk pillow that's long since collapsed into dust, is a replica. Half monkey, half fish, all nightmare. The infamous Fiji mermaid, a taxidermied hoax created in the early 19th century and popularized by American showman P.T. Barnum. He bought it, displayed it, made a fortune off it, and the public believed. Historians still argue whether audiences were truly fooled or simply enjoyed being fooled. After all, the Victorian era was defined by paradox, strict moral codes and secret curiosities, empire and insecurity, logic and longing. Sirens became part of that spectacle, not sacred, not feared, just marketable. You pass glass cases holding postcards, ticket stubs, tiny figurines of mermaids carved from whalebone, trinkets from a time when sirens were turned into collectibles, their power diluted then packaged. A fringe scholar once called it the merchandising of mystery. She argued that the Victorians didn't debunk sirens, they domesticated them, made them manageable, something to purchase, to gawk at, something no longer threatening. You sit on a red velvet bench, faded now to a dusty rose. Across from you hangs a portrait of a mermaid reclining seductively on a rock. Her eyes are cartoonish, her hair impossibly voluminous. It's not her. You know that. But it's what people were taught to see. The truth is, the Victorians didn't want to listen to the siren's song. They wanted to own it. They took the raw ache of longing and wrapped it in lace and exhibition glass, and in doing so, they transformed her from an existential threat to a bedtime curiosity, from a voice echoing in the waves to a punchline in a museum. You rise and step outside. The air feels fresher now, less manufactured. You glance back once. The cage remains empty, open, and yet you can't shake the feeling that someone was watching you the entire time. You walk toward the sea again.